Some men vanish into the background, not because they're invisible, but because the world stops paying attention. On a chilly Sunday morning, inside a busy diner, one of those men sat quietly by the window. His breakfast was mostly untouched, his posture fragile but upright. On his left wrist, barely visible beneath the sleeve of an old brown coat, rested a worn tattoo, a dagger piercing through an anchor. At the center table, a group of middle-aged men chuckled among themselves. "Bet he inked that himself in high. Cool," one smirked. "Real vets wear something official, ID, medals, a damn patch at least." Another guffawed. A waitress froze mid-step. The manager took notice. Politely but firmly he approached the older man. "Sir, we've had some concerns. Some guests feel uncomfortable. Would you mind moving to our outdoor seating?" The man said nothing, just gave a slow nod. One that didn't speak of agreement but of tired resignation. He lifted a tray in one hand, steadied a cane with the other, and walked with stiff dignity toward the patio. A prosthetic leg clicked beneath his jeans. As he passed the laughing table, one of them raised his coffee and mocked, "If he's a SEAL, I'm the damn president." Nobody stopped him. Nobody corrected them, not even me. And I worked there, standing behind the counter with a towel slung over my shoulder. I was new, a teenager with orders to smile and refill cups. But something about that man hurt to witness. He moved like he'd done this before, carried his shame quietly. Out on the patio, the cold autumn wind bit through the morning air. He sat at a table near the edge, still holding his cane in one hand, placing his now cold breakfast in front of him with the other. Inside, the buzz of conversation returned. The mockers chuckled again, softer now, but still smug. My hands were shaking, though I couldn't say why. Walter Reed. That was his name. Came in every year on the same day, sat at the same spot, ordered the same veteran special. Eggs, toast, no substitutions, no fuss, no company. Never spoke. Much beyond thank you, and still the regulars mocked him. That tattoo, worn, faded, almost forgotten by time, was the only story he seemed to carry. A symbol that looked homemade to the untrained eye. But there was something about it. The dagger, the anchor, the way it sat on his wrist like it had been there longer than memory. I watched from behind the counter as Walter's breath fogged against the glass. His shoulders slightly hunched. His eyes on his plate untouched. Then at exactly 8:46 a.m., the bell above the front door rang. A man walked in. Black jacket, military buzz cut, late 20s, ramrod straight posture, no smile, no hesitation. He didn't need to ask for a seat. He scanned the room once and his eyes locked instantly on the empty spot Walter had just left. Then to the window, then to the tattoo. And he froze. The diner's chatter dropped into silence. Even the old country music leaking from the speaker seemed to pause. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations died in mid-sentence, because this young man who moved like a soldier and breathed like a storm wasn't just looking, he was recognizing. He stepped forward. Jackson Miles, that's what I'd learn his name was later, moved slowly toward the window. Everyone turned to watch. He passed the mocking table without a glance. Their coffee mugs suddenly weren't so funny. When he reached the door, the wind slammed it shut behind him. Everyone flinched. Walter Reed didn't even lift his head. He was still eating in silence, or trying to. Jackson pushed open the patio door and stepped outside. He stopped 2 feet from Walter's table. Shoulders square, feet together, and raised his hand in a crisp, perfect salute. "Sir," he said, voice clear and steady, "are you Walter Reed of SEAL Team Bravo?" Walter looked up slowly, confused. The wind caught the edge of his coat, revealing the full tattoo. Jackson's voice cracked. Not from nerves, but reverence. "G7, isn't it, sir? They still tell stories about you during training." Walter blinked, like the name had stirred something long buried. His grip on the cane tightened. Lips parted slightly, as if words might come, but he only gave a quiet nod. Jackson held the salute for a moment longer, then spoke again, softer now, but loud enough for everyone inside to hear. "Permission to sit, sir?" Walter motioned to the chair across from him. "Of course, son." Jackson lowered his hand, but the reverence didn't leave his posture. He sat, back straight, eyes still locked on the man across from him like he couldn't believe this was real. Inside, no one moved. The four men who'd mocked Walter stared down into their coffee cups, red-faced and silent. Todd, the manager, stood halfway between the kitchen and the register, color drained from his cheeks. I stayed rooted behind the counter, heart pounding, because I'd heard that name before. Walter Reed. G7, not a nickname, a code. My grandfather used to whisper it when I was little, during stories that didn't feel like fairy tales until I realized they were real. He called him the man with the anchor and the dagger, the one who got them out alive when everything else failed. A ghost in military circles, a legend they weren't supposed to talk about. And now, here he was, just sitting on our patio. Quiet, almost forgotten, until today. Jackson's voice carried again, calm but firm. "This man," he said, glancing back toward the diner, "designed extraction methods we still use in active zones. He wrote field protocol that kept my unit alive. That mark," he pointed subtly to Walter's tattoo, "wasn't decoration. It was earned, with blood, with silence." His gaze fell on the group at the center table. "If anyone here finds the presence of a hero uncomfortable," he said coldly, "maybe you should be the ones sitting outside." The men shifted. One cleared his throat, rose awkwardly, and left his half-eaten meal behind. Another followed. The last two stayed seated, but couldn't look up. Walter didn't say anything, didn't need to, but there was something in the way his mouth curved slightly, a trace of a smile, worn and quiet, like a weight was finally lifting. I didn't decide to move. I just found myself doing it. I grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and stepped outside, hands trembling a little. Without a word, I filled Walter's cup. Then I turned to Jackson. "Would you like some too?" He looked up at me, young but solemn. "Yes, ma'am," he said gently. "Thank you." He took the cup with both hands like it was more than coffee, like it was part of the moment. I stood there, unsure of what to say. Then I remembered the piece of paper I had tucked into my apron that morning, a page from my grandfather's field journal, something I'd brought with me for reasons I couldn't explain. I reached into my pocket and unfolded it. Tucked inside was a photo, black and white, worn at the corners. Two young men, jungle, fatigues, mud-caked boots, wide grins. One was my grandfather. The other had a dagger and an anchor on his wrist. I placed the photo gently on the table in front of Walter. He froze. His eyes scanned the image, and when they met mine again, something changed. His expression softened, weathered lines relaxing. He looked younger somehow. "What was your grandfather's name?" he asked, voice low. "James Harrington," I said. Walter leaned back, breath catching in his chest. "He promised me burger when we got home," he whispered. Then he gave a soft chuckle, the kind that carries more memory than sound. I smiled through the lump in my throat. "He always said you were the reason they made it back." Walter's eyes flicked. Back to the photo, then to me. "You've got his eyes." Jackson remained silent, watching. He knew it wasn't his moment anymore. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat and raised his phone. He took a single photo. Walter, the tattoo, the coffee cup, the photo. Between us and me, standing by them. A quiet portrait on a quiet Sunday. That night, that image would travel farther than any of us imagined. By the time I got home that night, the photo had already started making its way across the internet. No filter, no caption, just a young soldier honoring a man the world had nearly overlooked. By morning, it had gone viral, not because it was perfectly framed, not because someone famous had shared it, but because it was real, a silent recognition, a faded tattoo, a cup of coffee, a folded photograph, and a girl in an apron watching it all, trying to hold back tears. Jackson hadn't told anyone. He'd posted it. He didn't need to. The image did the talking. People connected with it, shared it, commented things like, "How did we miss him? Who is Walter Reed? Is this real?" And by midweek, camera crews had set up outside the diner, trying to get interviews. The same manager who'd asked Walter to move outside dodged reporters like they were holding subpoenas. But me? I talked. I told them what I'd seen, how that old man carried silence like a second skin, how he took humiliation like he'd been trained for it, and how that one salute had changed everything. When they asked who Walter Reed was, I didn't list medals or missions. I just said, "He's the kind of man who never asked for anything but deserves everything." The story took on a life of its own. By Friday, handwritten letters began arriving at the diner. Some from veterans, some from their families. Notes that said things like, "I served in Vietnam. G7 was a legend." Or, "My dad told me a story about a man who carried 3 wounded guys out of a burning vehicle. I think that was your Walter." Then came the children. School classes, church groups, scout troops, all sending in cards, crayon drawings, and folded notes. One letter, written in shaky pencil, read, "Dear Mr. Reed, my grandpa cried when he saw your photo. He said you were the reason he got home." Walter didn't know what to do with them. One day he brought a stack in and handed them to me. "You'll know what to do with these," he said. I framed some, posted others on the community bulletin board. Above them I pinned a handwritten sign. "If you see Walter, say thank you. Thee." Next morning, someone left a single daisy on the patio table where he used to sit. No card, just a napkin with the words, "We see you now." 2 weeks later, I got a call from City Hall. They were organizing the Veterans Day ceremony and wanted Walter to speak. "He doesn't like attention," I warned. The woman on the other end hesitated, then said, "That's exactly why we need him." I called Walter that evening. He was quiet for a long moment. "If it helps others feel remembered," he said, "I'll go." That Sunday, I watched from the back of the town auditorium as Walter stepped slowly toward the podium. No uniform, no ribbons, just a clean button-down shirt, his prosthetic leg polished, and that tattoo still visible beneath the rolled-up sleeve. He stood at the microphone, looked out at the packed room, and said one sentence, "I'm not a hero. I'm not a legend. I just did what was right." And, tried to live quiet after. That was it. He stepped back and the entire room rose to its feet. Not because he spoke at length, not because he said something rehearsed, but because what he said was true. And truth, spoken quietly, can be louder than any speech. After that, something shifted in town. A little, but enough to feel. People began greeting Walter on the street. Kids waved. Church folks invited him to speak, not to preach but to share. The old garage he ran, which had barely survived the last few years, suddenly had a waiting list for repairs. One morning, a group of high school volunteers showed up with brushes and buckets. "We're here to paint, sir," they said. Walter grumbled, but let them. The following week, someone fixed the squeaky gate, then someone else patched the roof. 2 veterans dropped off a box of tools. "Figured you could use a fresh set," they said. Walter never asked for any of it. He just smiled, nodded, and went back to work, because that's who he was. That spring, the mayor called a press conference. She stood in front of City Hall with a folded note in her hand and a determined look on her face. "Some names deserve to be remembered," she said, "especially the ones who never asked to be." They announced that the street where Walter's auto shop stood would be renamed, not after a politician, not after a wealthy donor, but after a quiet man who carried more than his share without ever saying a word. 3 weeks later, a new street. Sign was mounted. Nothing fancy, just white letters on a plain metal post. It read Silent Service Way. A small American flag fluttered beneath it. No ribbon cutting, no speeches. Walter wouldn't have wanted that. Still, he was there that morning, standing next to the new sign in a freshly ironed shirt, his hand resting on his cane. When they unveiled the plaque beside the flagpole, he stepped forward and gently touched the engraved metal. It was simple, elegant. A tribute etched in steel, "Honor the quiet ones." those who bore the weight so others didn't have to. Below the inscription, a small emblem, a dagger through an anchor. Walter didn't speak that day. He didn't need to. His eyes were damp, but no tears fell. That summer passed quietly. Walter kept showing up to the shop, slower now, but still dependable. People dropped by with old photos, thank you notes, or just a handshake. Some sat for hours, listening to him talk about carburetors and fuel lines. But if you caught him in the right mood, he might tell you about a time he once carried a wounded soldier through a smoke-filled rice field, waiting on a medevac that arrived 3 minutes too late. He never called it bravery. Never used the word hero. He just said, "I finished the job," and then came his birthday. Walter turned 85. He didn't want a celebration. Told everyone he'd be content with black coffee and dry toast like always. But life had other plans. Just before 9 a.m. that day, a low rumble swept through the town. Tires crunching on gravel outside the shop. I stepped out of the diner and saw them. 3 black SUVs, followed by 2 Humvees, all pulling up to the curb. 7 young men stepped out. Immaculate uniforms, polished boots, sharp salutes. And then, another figure emerged from the last SUV, Sarah Harrington, my cousin, my best friend, and the granddaughter of James Harrington. She held a small wooden box and a folded American flag. Walter emerged from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. His brow furrowed until he saw her. He blinked like he couldn't trust his eyes. Sarah stepped forward, voice trembling. "Hi," she said. "You probably don't remember me." Walter tilted his head, studying her face. "I do," he said softly. "You've got your grandfather's eyes," she smiled, blinking fast to hold back the emotion. "We came to honor your birthday and to say thank you." The SEALs stepped forward one by one, standing at attention before Walter and offering a crisp salute. No ceremony, no microphones, just respect. Then together they presented the wooden box. Inside, a medallion from the Navy SEAL Historical Foundation. It bore Walter's name, his unit designation, and a phrase engraved in gold. "For service above silence." Walter's hands trembled slightly as he held it. His thumbs traced the words over and over, like he was trying to absorb them. "I thought they forgot," he whispered. Sarah took his hand gently. "We never did." For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind rustled through the trees above them, and the town seemed to stand still. No cars passed, no doors opened. Just Walter holding the medallion, surrounded by soldiers who knew exactly what it meant to carry something alone. Sarah stepped closer, her voice now barely above a whisper. "He would have been proud, you know." Walter looked at her, searching her face. "My grandfather," she said. "James Harrington. He always said you were the reason they made it home, and I'm proud I got to meet you. Not just for him, but for all of us." Walter blinked slowly, then reached out and placed a hand over hers. "He was the best of us," he murmured. Sarah nodded, tears slipping down her cheek. "So were you." For a second, Walter didn't look 85 anymore. He looked 25, young, brave, fierce, like he was back in the jungle, back in the fire, back in that moment where everything depended on the man beside you. Only now, he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. That week, something subtle but permanent shifted in the town. No big announcement, no breaking news. Just a quiet motion brought before the city council by the mayor herself. A proposal to officially rename the stretch of road in front of Walter's garage. Not after a senator, not a business, not some historical figure from a textbook. After a man who asked for nothing and gave everything. 3 weeks later, a simple metal sign went up. Plain white letters, no spotlights, no ribbon. It read, "Zealand Service Way." Beneath it, a small American flag fluttered in the breeze. Walter didn't make a speech that day. He just stood beside the new sign, nodded once, and ran a hand along the post. His eyes shimmered, but like always, the tears stayed tucked behind the silence. After that, he kept showing up to work at the shop. Slower than before, his steps more deliberate but still steady, still precise, still Walter. Neighbors came more often, not just for repairs, but to visit, to listen, to say thank you. Kids stopped by with drawings, stick figures and crayon sketches of a smiling old man with a tattoo on his wrist. Veterans came too, bringing yellowed photographs, folded letters, and old stories they'd never told anyone else. Walter listened more than he talked, but sometimes, if you caught him in a rare moment of softness, he'd tell you something real. He'd talk about how once, when a helicopter was delayed, he carried a wounded man across a rice field with bullets cracking in the distance. Not because it was ordered, just because the job wasn't finished. He never called it bravery, never called himself a hero. He just called it doing what needed to be done. That's how he lived, until the day he didn't. It happened 3 years later, in the early days of fall. The morning air was cool and crisp, and the leaves had only just begun to turn. Word spread quietly like a breeze through a cornfield. Walter Reed had passed away in his sleep. No noise, no pain. Just gone. Quietly. Just like he lived. By noon, the whole town felt it. The diner closed early, the high school canceled classes. A hush settled across the community as people began gathering outside the small white church on the edge of town, the one with peeling paint and a slightly crooked steeple. They came in work boots and dress uniforms, flannel shirts and faded caps. Some wore medals pinned to jackets that hadn't fit right in years. Others brought nothing but memories. They came because they knew. Even if Walter had never told them out loud, they knew what he'd carried. The funeral was modest, just as he would have wanted. A wooden casket, an American flag folded neatly across the top. At Walter's request, there were no eulogies, no videos, no list of accolades. Just one song, played low and slow like it was tiptoeing through the room. 6 active-duty Navy SEALs, including Jackson Miles, carried the casket. They'd flown in from all over the country, not because it was an obligation, because when a man like Walter Reed leaves this world, you show up. Sarah Harrington sat in the front pew, her fingers clutching an old photo, creased and faded, the same one we'd placed on that patio table years ago. Her grandfather, James, smiling beside a young Walter Reed, both dressed in jungle gear, both too young for the weight they carried. At the gravesite, after the final prayer, Sarah stepped forward. She leaned down and gently placed the photograph. On the polished wood of Walter's coffin, "You kept the promise," she whispered, "for both of you." The headstone was simple, his name, his dates, and one line the town had chosen unanimously. His silence saved lives. Back at the diner, we still served the veterans special every Sunday. Eggs and toast, no substitutions. But the back corner table stayed empty. A small brass plaque was fixed to the wood, bolted in place forever. It read, "Reserved in memory of Walter Reed, SEAL Team Bravo, G7. Some men carry the mission long after the war ends." Tourists sometimes asked about the plaque. They'd point at the empty table and wonder who he was. Locals never gave long answers. They'd just smile and nod toward the street sign outside. Silent Service Way. Because in our town, we didn't need to tell the story. We remembered it. We lived it. Around here, not all stories are told out loud. Some are carried in silence, in memory, in the small things people do when no one's watching. Walter's wasn't a tale we shouted from rooftops. It was one we kept, like an heirloom. A reminder that some heroes don't leave footprints. They leave shadows that stretch further than we can see. And even now, years later, his presence lingers. You can feel it on Sunday mornings when the diner starts to hum, when the smell of toast and bacon fills the air. When someone glances toward the corner table and leaves it untouched, because we all know whose seat that is. The plaque says it clearly, but honestly it doesn't need to. Every local knows that chair is sacred now. The tourists still ask, of course, they always do. Who was Walter Reed? Sometimes folks give the short version. He was a Navy SEAL, one of the best. But most of the time, we just point to the street sign out front and say, "That'll tell you everything you need to know." Silent Service Way. It speaks louder than any headline ever could, because Walter's legacy wasn't built on speeches or medals. It was shaped in silence, in the quiet way he walked through the world, helping when no one knew to ask, giving long after anyone was keeping count, and the town hasn't forgotten. The kids still bring drawings. One of them taped a note to the diner window not long ago. In crooked handwriting it read, "Some heroes stop fighting, but they never stop protecting." I left it there. We still get letters too. Emails now, messages from people across the country. A woman from Oregon once wrote, "My father served in Vietnam. He said there was a man in his unit who never talked much but always knew what to do. I showed him Walter's picture, and he just nodded and said, 'Yeah, that's him.' Even now, years after the photo went viral, people continue to share it. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's perfectly framed, but because it's honest. A young soldier saluting an old man with a forgotten tattoo. A folded photo between them, a coffee cup. A girl in an apron watching, learning. No words were needed, because in a world full of noise, sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that last. And in those quiet places, among forgotten names, faded ink, and people passed over by history, kindness still finds a way. Walter taught us that not every act of courage is loud, not every hero wears medals on their chest, and not everyone who saves lives wants recognition. Some just need to know someone made it home, that someone had breakfast, that someone wasn't alone. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. We don't always get to choose who becomes a legend. Sometimes the world forgets until it's reminded, but once in a while a town remembers first, and then the rest of us follow. So if you're ever passing through, stop by the diner. Order the Veterans Special. Sit by the window. Look out at the street sign that says Silent Service Way, and if you feel something in your throat that makes you pause for a second, that's Walter, still reminding us what quiet honor looks like.